to start posting them. Okay. We have also started recording this session, so it will be available for viewing for later. So again, I'm asking everyone, those who have their doubts, please start posting them in the meeting chat. Yes, Pavan. I have already announced twice that maybe 3 times that dual degree students who need to go for the CDC test, they can go. There will be no penalty for attendance. So I'll request everyone to post their doubts on the stress chapter. Okay. We have discussed quite a bit on the mathematical preliminaries and the kinematics chapter. Uh, so let us go ahead and discuss the doubts on the stress. Sir, there's one question from Puli Vineet. How can you expand del dot sigma, which is a tensor of order 2? We know how to operate for del dot v. So it is not that much difficult for a Cartesian coordinate system, but it becomes significantly more involved for a r theta z coordinate system, a cylindrical or a spherical coordinate system. Okay, so what I will suggest is, now Puli Vineet, if you can try this on your own, that you consider the grad operator like a vector whose components are del x, del y, and del z, and the sigma as a 3 into 3 matrix, and then try to take uh, like a dot product between them and then see what happens. Okay, so if you cannot do that, we'll see. Okay, so at least for a Cartesian coordinate system, the rectangular Cartesian coordinate system, the XYZ, it should be fairly easy to do using your uh, simple matrix multiplication. So next question is from Yash Harishbhai Bhayani. Sir, while deriving Cauchy's formula, we took traction on both the sides t with the respective suffix. But in the last step, you told T11, T12, etc. as stress. But on right hand side, we kept T as traction. Why, sir, like that? So from among the recorded notes, can you please tell me which one you are referring to? I'm not very clear. So I have the recorded notes that I shared on the website. Which page are you referring to?
Sir, in the lecture about balancing the linear momentum, when we were deriving the components, we took the components of traction Tn. T in
Specifically, which page of the recorded notes are you talking about?
let 1 minute. Sir, page 6. Page number 6. Yes, sir.
Hang on. So these are the handwritten notes from the on the green board. That page number 6 you are talking about, right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Or is it the typewritten notes?
No, sir. Handwritten notes.
Okay. Yes. So I have written here that Tn1 is equal to T11N1 plus T21N2 plus T31N3, like that.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So your question is?
Sir, on the right hand side, we took T11 as a stress component in one direction.
Right.
But on the left hand side also we have a traction only, no? Tn1.
Yes.
So that is also a stress, we can say, in n direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
So that is the stress on a plane on which the unit vector, the unit outward normal is along the n direction, and you are taking the component along the one direction.
Okay, okay. Sir.
Yeah. So let me see the next question. The next question is by Puli Vinit. So I think he's continuing with the previous question. So right, I understand that you are talking about the Cauchy's equation of motion. So we do have the delta dot sigma term there. So that's what I'm saying. So if you try to take the matrix product of, the matrix representation of that dot product, you should be able to obtain those three components, the del sigma xx del x plus del sigma xy del y plus del sigma xz del z, which is the x component, and similarly for the y component and the z component. So Pulivinit, if I'm talking at cross purposes here, please correct me.
I got it. Hello.
Hello, Puneet, are you speaking?
Yes, sir. Sir, I got it, sir. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Next question is by Akhil Prem. I could not understand while deriving Cauchy's formula, why did we consider tetrahedron? So I have already mentioned this during the lecture. Maybe you missed that part. So the whole idea behind the whole motivation behind taking the tetrahedron is that a tetrahedron allows us to simultaneously consider a plane, a general plane, which is the tilted surface, as well as at the same time consider planes which are respectively parallel to the one axis, the two axis, and the three axis. So three of the planes of the tetrahedron, or three of the sides of the tetrahedron, are parallel to the, or they are flush with the x planes which are perpendicular to the x1 axis, the x2 axis, and the x3 axis. Simultaneously, the fourth side is a general plane on which we can talk about a general unit outward normal, a general traction. And when we work with this tetrahedron, we can eventually find out a relationship between the traction on such a general plane as well as on the traction components, which are nothing but the stress components on the other three planes. Okay, we do want to have a machinery in our hand such that this connection can be made, and the tetrahedron gives us the best possible help towards that. That is the whole motivation. The next question is by Rahul Agarwal. He's asking, sir, I did not understand that while deriving the traction stress relationship, after the mean value theorem step, we have taken point O on the triangle ABC. As h tends to 0, point O should be close to triangle ABC, but not on that surface. So yes, as we keep on decreasing the value of h, the ABC plane starts to go towards O. And only in the limit that it tends to 0, that the ABC plane that will, I mean, almost become like that will tend towards O, or it will become almost coincident with O. Does that answer your question, Rahul? Maybe you can unmute yourself and ask.
Yes, sir, that was the only doubt. Yes.
Okay. Pulivinit, yes, something like that. Del transpose dot sigma chord. Yeah. But don't be too happy with that notion, because that is absolutely not going to work uh, when you are working in the cylindrical coordinate system or in the spherical coordinate system. You completely break down that thing, because the problem is in the cylindrical coordinate system, you also have non-zero derivatives of the unit vectors themselves when you are deriving with respect to theta. So del epsilon r, del E r hat del theta and del E theta del theta, those are not zero. They have uh, values, okay, and they contribute various terms, which is why in the cylindrical and the spherical coordinate system, they are much more difficult looking expressions. Next question is by Shivangshu. He's asking, sir, although you have said in the video lecture that you won't discuss the expansion of the term divergence rho v diad V, because we have studied in our fluid mechanics course, if you could have time, you could please discuss as a concept refresher. Yeah, sure. So uh, what I can do is I can make a little short video, because this is just textbook material. Okay, so and I can maybe post it on YouTube again. Yeah. Actually, Shivangshu, I'll definitely do it. No problem. It's a very short derivation, but you can try one thing. Okay, so I mean, based on the whatever is written in the in that video, and as well as in the typeset notes, you have the answer in your hand, right? So what I will suggest is, just as an exercise, as a further exercise in mathematical preliminaries, you can try to do that by the index notation. So that the divergence of rho v diad v. So you can think of it like del xj rho vi vj. Okay, give it a try. It's fun to do. Okay, you'll see that you'll be able to obtain it. Anyways, I will give you the answer, but just try it on your own a little bit. Yeah, sure. So proceed like this: del xj rho vi vj. So that rho vi vj represents the dyadic product between the rho v vector and the v vector, and the outside del xj, that is representative of the divergence. Next, Shubhal Sagar is asking lecture 23. While writing the expression for t is equal to n hat sigma et hat, I think there should be n hat transpose. Yes, otherwise it won't work in the matrix notation. So actually in some books what you will find is that when authors are using the compact notation, they don't use the hat, but definitely for the matrix you will need the transpose, otherwise it won't work. So sorry about that. So next, Pulivinit is asking, sir, in principal stresses video, can you please explain why you have considered component of traction along n unit vector as sigma, Tn equal to sigma? Well, I could have written this as zeta also. I could have written this as lambda also, no problem. So just to, like in many books, the principal stresses are represented as the sigma. That is why I wrote it like that. No problem. Is that your question? Maybe I'm misunderstanding your question. Can you please unmute yourself and ask? Pulivinit, can you please unmute yourself?
Sir, am I audible?
Very faintly. Can you please speak louder?
Sir, am I audible now?
Yeah, kind of.
Sir, in the lecture you have mentioned that in a very special situation,
Yes.
Traction vector is parallel to n cap.
Traction vector is parallel to n cap in the special situation that we are working on a principal plane.
The normal component of Tn is given by symbol sigma. You have mentioned that. I was confused for there.
So what is the confusion? So this is just a symbol that I have used.
So even we can even keep it as Tn and then we can derive it, right? I mean, there is
you can absolutely. You can keep it. You can call it zeta. You can call it lambda. Whatever you want.
Okay.
You can call it P. You can call it Q. So I wrote sigma because in many of the textbooks it is written the principal stresses, because these things are eventually going to turn out to be principal stresses. Those are referred to as sigma. So that's why I wrote it. So sigma without any subscripts, superscripts, those are principal stresses, something like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Saksham. So so Saksham is asking a very nice question, that do principal stresses and principal strains occur in the same direction? This is a very, very good question. Okay, so only when you have the linear elastic isotropic behavior, which we will discuss in more detail in the next chapter on material behavior, you will have the principal directions associated with the stresses to be coincident with the principal directions associated with the strains. Otherwise, no. So for our purposes within the course of applied elasticity, where we will be mostly concerned or almost exclusively concerned with linear elastic isotropic behavior, which is the kind of behavior you have been studying since your first year, that is represented by the generalized Hooke's law. That kind of behavior, whenever you have the principal directions from the strains and the principal directions from the stresses, they are going to be exactly along the same direction. Okay. Very good question. And we can actually show that. I think in the problem sheet on material behavior, I have actually asked you to prove this thing. Okay, it's a very short proof. You can actually find it and satisfy yourself. So maybe in the next week. So Kostov is asking, when we represent the principal stresses on a cube, only normal I don't really understand what you mean by principal stresses on a cube, but let's go ahead. Only normal sigma 11, sigma 22, sigma 33 exists, right? Because that's how we define principal directions, the ones along which the traction vector gets aligned with the unit normal. So I guess that when you say that principal stresses on a cube, what you basically mean is that the faces are parallel to the principal planes. So if that is your question, yes. Then only sigma 11, sigma 22 and sigma 33 exist. And those sigma 11, sigma 22 and sigma 33 are themselves the eigenvalues of the problem, basically the principal values themselves. Okay, all other the shear components of the stresses, so that they will be 0. Your next part of the question is, however, why do we talk about maximum shear stresses under such conditions? What? No, we don't. We certainly don't. On those planes, the shear stresses are 0. It doesn't exist on that cube. So you have to think of it like this, that yes, if you consider your coordinate axis to be aligned in such a fashion that they are along the principal directions, then certainly you can draw a cube such that the faces are perpendicular to these to this special choice of the coordinate axis, and they also happen to be the principal planes. So on none of these planes you will have any shear stress. Forget maximum. Shear stress is by definition 0 on each of those faces. But you note that this is also a state of stress. A state of stress means you choose a particular coordinate system. The values of the stresses or the stress components that show up in the stress tensor, that is basically a snapshot of your stress state. Now, refer to this new coordinate system. If you keep on taking different coordinate systems, okay, or maybe you are changing your plane, then on some plane you will end up with a situation where the shear stress is very much there, and maybe on not maybe there will be one plane on which this value of the shear stress is maximum, but that plane will certainly not be coincident with any of the 6 faces of the cube. You actually have to rotate and go to another plane. So Tresca's maximum shear, I don't know why you want to call it Tresca's, but okay, maximum shear is equal to half of sigma 11 minus sigma 33. Absolutely true. So it's time for my writing app to come into the picture. Okay, so let's bring it to share my screen. Hang on. Can you all see my writing app, the green colored writing app? Please raise your hand. Okay, all right. Please lower your hand. Let me try to see if I can address this difficulty. Okay, so I would have loved to refer to problem number 1, or not problem number 1, sorry. Let me see which problem I gave. So I'm referring to the problem sheet 3. So right now we are not going to discuss that problem. So this is going to be question number 9. Okay, so in the agenda for today's meeting, I had mentioned specifically that we would be discussing lecture number 17 to lecture number 24. So it has still not come. I mean, this time is still not ripe for me to discuss the problem sheet, and certainly not problem number 9, which comes near the end of the problem sheet. So I will bypass that. But I will appeal to your knowledge from your undergraduate days here. So it's something like this, that you consider the 2-dimensional case. Okay, so like this. Forget the cube, just take a square, just like first year mechanics. Now we have the coordinate axis like this. The yellow colored coordinate axis are like X and Y. And we have set up a square like this. The faces of the square, they are parallel to the X and Y axis. And what we have now is this sigma XX, this sigma XY, sigma YY, here also sigma XY, and all its brothers and sisters, okay, on the other two faces. I'm not going to complete this picture, okay, to keep it like this, as far as clean as possible. Now, as drawn here and as depicted by this arbitrary choice of the X and Y axis, we certainly do not expect that this sigma XX value is highest, that it is any of the principal stresses. Correspondingly, sigma YY will also not be principal stress. And we have these general values now. Now, suppose our job is to find out principal stress. What we are going to do, we are going to rotate this square. We are going to rotate this square to such an extent such that maybe when we rotate it like this, we end up with an orientation such that this particular plane on which I am hovering my arrow, this particular plane is such a plane on which I do have the existence of the principal stress. Now this thing is a principal stress. I cannot write it as sigma XX anymore. This is certainly not sigma XX. This is some other thing. Okay, so let's call this sigma P. Now, because I have said that this plane is turning out to be a principal plane on which we have this extremum value of the stress, of the normal stress, by definition, my sigma or the shear stress on this thing has to be 0. There will be no shear. Now, let us consider a situation where I am orienting my coordinate axis not like this arbitrarily, but I'm making a very specific choice of orienting my coordinate axis like this. This is my new choice. So X dash, Y dash. Okay. Very special choice of the coordinate system. Now you forget about the X and Y. And now you think of it like this. This is my X dash. This is my Y dash. And here, for even, since I'm completely deleting the previous yellow colored X and Y, I might not as well write this as X dash and Y dash. Okay, so the discussion will be even clearer. And now you see this, this square, this rotated square, which was in this picture, that was depicted by this dashed line, that I am going to draw with a bold line here. Okay. But we know physically that on this plane, on this particular plane, I have the existence of my principal stress. So this is sigma P. But you also note that referred to this coordinate system, this sigma P is nothing but sigma XX. Sigma P is the sigma XX, and suppose you want to think of a sigma XY here, this sigma XY, because of the physical situation that we have chosen to work with, this sigma XY is equal to 0. Similarly, the sigma XY here, that is equal to 0. And if you want to draw some stress here, that will be another value of the principal stress, certainly not equal to this. And in order to distinguish between these two, we can think of this as sigma P1 and this as sigma P2. And that thing is going to be equal to sigma YY, where this Y refers to this Y. Now, again, I'm highlighting the fact, or I'm emphasizing the fact, on both these two planes, the sigma XY is very much 0 by definition. Now, what you do is you come back to this picture. and you forget that I ever drew this thing. Okay. So let me erase this. Let me erase this. Okay, so okay. All right. Let me also erase this if I can. We are back to where we began. Okay, so I hope you don't mind this much. Okay, little bit of clutter, but sorry. Now, forget this entire picture on the right hand side, come back to this picture. And now I'm asking that find out such a plane on which the maximum values of the shear stress will appear. So you go about rotating it, and on each plane that appears, you try to find out the shear stresses. Okay, you plot out the various values. It is like an experiment. You rotate it a little bit, find out the shear stresses, rotate it a little bit, find out the shear stresses, everything you find out, and track down on which plane this kind of maximum value of the shear stress is occurring. So let us say that ultimately it turns out that maybe on orienting it in this particular fashion, maybe somewhat little bit different from before, maybe like this. Okay, even more tilt, like this. If you do it like this, then on this plane the maximum shear stress is occurring. Fine. So you note that now I'm no longer referring to this picture. Okay, I'm only referring to this picture. So let's say on this particular plane the maximum shear stress is occurring. Okay, now we come back to this picture. Here all this sigma xx, sigma xy that was in the previous picture, that is no longer makes sense because we have changed our coordinate system, the x to xy. Here our sigma xx refers to this, sigma y refers to this. Now if we rotate the plane here, okay, this square here, so we'll perhaps end up with something like this. And here on this plane, let's say, or on this plane, let's say the maximum shear stress is occurring. Now the value of the normal stress that appears on this thing, it is certainly not going to be sigma p1. And in general, we cannot always also say that whether sigma p1 is the stress, the normal stress that is appearing here, that will be 0 or what. Okay, it may be 0, may not be 0, we don't know. But what we have stopped here is to note down is that the value of the shear stress that is appearing, that is the maximum thing. Now the actual value of that maximum shear stress, that actually comes out as sigma p1 minus sigma p3 in a three-dimensional state of stress, as you will discover for yourself by doing question number 9 and I believe question number 10 from the problem sheet. Right, from question number 9 and from question number 10 of the problem sheet. The actual value, how it appears, you will figure that out for yourself. And people who have done already 3D Morse circle in your undergraduate days, you know how that appears. Okay, but that is only the specific, very niche question of the actual value of the maximum shear stress. But you please note that this plane is certainly different from this plane on which the principal stress was occurring. Okay, so Kostov, you please tell me whether this long-winded discussion, does it make sense? Yes. Okay. But I still urge you, okay, please do not be satisfied by this kind of a qualitative discussion. You please go through question number 9 and the question number 10. Okay. It will be actually clear. And we can have a discussion on that also later on. No problem. If you want to ask something, you can unmute yourself and ask Kostov. It's a very, very important thing. There should not be any doubt on it. Like just because it is something that I am borrowing from basically from your undergraduate days doesn't mean that we should not have a proper discussion on it. Like these live sessions are primarily meant for these things. Kostov or anybody else? Yes, Kostov, please unmute yourself and ask.
Sir, does it mean when we are representing the stress, the state of stress only in terms of principal stresses,
Right.
the non-diagonal terms are zero? So
Which terms? Which terms?
Non-diagonal.
The non-diagonal terms are zero. Absolutely. Yes.
Just the state of stress in that representation gives the feeling that no shear stresses exist in the body.
No, not in the body, not in the body. And only on the planes that you are talking about. Shear stresses very much exist in the body, but only in the, so it is like this. Let me go back to the writing app. Okay, so you think of it like this. All the squares and cubes that we draw, those are only surrounding a little point or a single point in the body. So suppose you have a general three-dimensional body like this. Okay, and you take a little, not little, I mean a point in it, and you draw a little square around it, or maybe a little cube around it, if you want to consider the three-dimensional situation. So this cube is an infinitesimally small cube surrounding this point P, in the neighborhood of this point P, or the neighborhood of this particular point. And we are zooming that thing out and talking about the various states of stress that are appearing on the surfaces. Okay, like this, when we say that it is sigma xx, it is basically we want to say that it is so very small that is effectively for all practical purposes the stress on that point on a plane which is parallel to this plane that we have just drawn. Okay, now if you have taken a coordinate system like this which is parallel to these faces, or I mean, you understand what I'm saying, it is, these are perpendicular to these faces, this individual coordinate axis, then in the very special situation that these coordinate axes are oriented along the principal directions of the stresses at that point, that you will have appearing on these faces no shear stress. But sitting at that very point, if you rotate your cube, like instead of this, you take a cube which is like this, which is another orientation, then on that plane very much shear stresses can appear, and those are the shear stresses corresponding to the same point within the same body. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. So the state of stress cannot truly represent what the body is actually feeling. It depends on the coordinate axis we are choosing as well.
The only thing is that the state of stress, if you know in one particular coordinate system, using the coordinate transformations from mathematical preliminaries, you can go to any other coordinate system. So that's why we say that if we choose one coordinate system and we have the complete information about the 6 independent elements of stress in that coordinate system, then basically we have the complete information about the state of stress in any coordinate system. So we basically know the state of stress for the whole body for all the points if we know that this information. The rest of it is just mathematical manipulation. So think about it a little bit, and maybe we come back to this question a few minutes later. So Shivangshu, sir, I have a rather more of a practical question, probably off topic. Could I ask if time permits? Please ask, Shivangshu.
Yes, sir, I would speak. Sir, actually, while in any machinery, sir, when we design,
any machine can be designed.
Any machinery while we're designing, sir. So stress at any point, we don't have the stress. As you can say, if you have to measure the stress, we simply apply the strain gauge at that point, and we calculate the stress.
You cannot even do that. So if you're really talking practically, if you're really interested in measuring the strain using strain gauges, you can only apply strain gauges on the surfaces that are available to you.
Right,
You
right, sir.
cannot go inside and put a strain gauge inside a body.
Exactly, sir. So,
Yes.
so in that case, how do we design that machine, sir? Because we don't know at what point the stress will be maximum and under what condition the machine will fail. So
Absolutely, which is why we have to spend so much time and effort in studying these kinds of uh, uh, theories. Okay, if it had been that easy to just patch something on like a sensor and then just read out the value, then we did not have to do all these things. Furthermore, suppose even if that were possible, you would be able to do it only after you have made a thing. But since your question is about designing a thing, you have nothing in your hand. It's like an empty tabletop, and your job is to fill that tabletop with the machine part that your customer wants. So you actually have to design it from a very abstract point of view, and that abstract point of view starts maybe 100 years ago. It started from the draftsman piece of paper. Now it would start on a computer screen. So you make a 3D model of it, go to the analysis of it, calculate the stresses and strains based on the material behavior information you have, do various kinds of analysis on it, realize that your 3D design is a complete disaster because at some places the stresses are way too high for any material to resist that kind of thing. Then you go back and redesign it, come back and analyze it once more, realize it has become a little bit better, but somewhere else it is failing by something else. You go back and design it. So it's a lot of iterative procedure if you really have to make an absolutely new machine part. So there is no question of putting on strain gauges and doing things like that. But let's say that you have actually successfully made a machine part and somehow you are really interested in reading of the state of strain at a particular point. So there are indirect ways of doing it. Okay, one classical way was using photoelasticity, but that is hardly done. Nowadays, people use other techniques. So so maybe you learn some of them in your design and dynamics lab if it occurs finally. I don't know. So the teachers who are involved there, they have some plans on having your design and dynamics lab in a virtual way. Maybe you learn some techniques there. Okay, but some of the cutting edge techniques I don't know even our design and dynamics lab if they demonstrate to you. And I'm certainly no expert on experiments, so let me not encroach on topics on which I'm not an expert. But there are the bottom line is that there are indirect ways of doing it. Okay, not by using strain gauges, mind you. Does it answer your question, Shivangshu, somewhat?
yes, somewhat it answers because in industry we usually do destructive testing sort of our machines.
No. So destructive testing there tab to khatam hi ho gaya.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So let's not do that.
So this practical problems are actually while designing any machine we faces every now and then, and
Yes.
That's the only option that we have to. In the end, we heavily rely on experimentation only, sir. So while designing, it's more of a it's very challenging, sir.
Yes, so many times even after the thing is designed, you can make idealized models of it and try to do maybe an FEM analysis of it. But at the end of the day, the FEM analysis would be based on an idealization of the actual machine part. Because as you can realize, because of some kind of defects or something, the material is not going to behave exactly like in theory. Even if you think that something is isotropic, it may not be really isotropic. There may be certain defects in it, some impurities in the material, which can totally make your calculations to be off by even a complete order of magnitude. So yeah, I know this is challenging and I don't have a definite answer to it. Okay, and I really wish that we were able to talk with cutting edge industry experts to be able to answer you, but I am not the right person for that. Okay, sorry.
Thank you, sir.
Kostov, have you thought about what we were discussing? If you want to ask something again, going back to that topic, please ask. You
Yes,
absolutely should not have any doubt about that. Like absolutely no doubt. Like you were asking in the discussion channel uh, about that question in the assignment sheet. That is more of an intellectual question. Okay, I mean, we can have an indulgent discussion about it. It's a basically navel gazing. Okay, so thinking about differentiability, invertibility, all those things, it's fine. But it really doesn't matter so much in the long run. But if you don't have a proper idea about how we are talking about maximum shear stresses and principal stresses, then it's a big problem. We need to address it. And anyone else, it's not just Kostov. So uh, he's just the voice that is speaking now. But I'm sure that many of you will have similar doubts here and there, which may seem like very basic doubts, but please do not be shy to or hesitant to ask this. Okay. It should not be the case that we only talk about big things, all differential calculus and integral calculus and whatnot. And on these basic things, we have doubts. That should not be the case. Yes, Kostov, you're saying something.
No, sir, I'm not comfortable with it. Actually, I was mixing up 2 or 3 stuffs together. That's why I was facing that problem.
I suggest you one thing. Okay, you sit down comfortably and think about it hard, like really hard, and see if you can find some flaws in it or something which may appear like I am bypassing that discussion, maybe by presuming some knowledge on your part. If you think like that, then please come back and ask. Maybe in the discussion channel only. Not maybe, you ask in the discussion channel definitely, because then others can also see what that discussion is leading to.
Okay, sir, I will do that. Thank you.
Yes. Did anyone else ask any question in between? Let me just scroll up and see. I think I have answered. Any other doubts? Has anyone started doing the problem sheet from stress? Please raise your hand if you started doing the problem sheet on stress. Okay. Good. It seems like we have diametrically opposite situation in terms of load. So the dual degree guys, they are completely loaded, like really loaded hard this semester. But the MTech guys are loaded kind of psychologically because they have not yet come to the campus and all these things, but they're very much up to speed with all the problem sheets and everything, it seems. Balasab, do you want to ask something? You're raising a hand. So I'll request everyone to please post their remaining doubts. Meanwhile, I'll just take the attendance. Okay. So I've taken the attendance. So people who have this may be some question. So Shukanto Patra is asking, sir, in the Cartesian coordinate system, do all the principal stresses in mutually perpendicular axes have their maximum value? I don't really understand what you are asking, Shukanto. Can you please unmute yourself and ask?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I was asking, sir, is the principal stresses which we are considering, they are all maximum in the, means all attain their maximum values, like in the all the mutual perpendicular directions?
No, maximum values means what? So suppose in one particular direction, we have one principal value, sigma 1.
Yes, sir.
One direction perpendicular to it, sigma 2, and another direction perpendicular to both the first and the second, sigma 3. So
Yes, sir.
of course, in a very general situation, sigma 1 is not going to be equal to sigma 2, is not going to be equal to sigma 3. So it is very much possible that among these three values which come out as solutions of the eigenvalue problem, one of them is actually the numerically the highest value. So let's say sigma 1. So sigma 1 is the highest among the principal values. What I don't understand, what you are asking about individually, they are the maximum values, that I don't understand.
Sir, yes, sir. Sir, sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 means
Yes.
all these three are means maximum values in their axis. Means any other type of plane which if we consider means in that plane there will be no stress value equal to this.
Acha, I get it. Right. So if you're talking about a particular three-dimensional body and you are talking about a very, very specific kind of loading, then sitting at a particular point, you will have only three unique directions along which these kinds of maximum values are appearing. So yes, in that sense, they're very much maximum. So along those directions only they have the maximum values. If you tilt a little bit, you will get a value which is lower than this.
But sir, when we consider the stress invariant, sir,
yes,
in that case, means the first invariant is always sum of the three normal stresses, sir. Means sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3.
Yes.
So in that case, to maintain that equality, so the principal stresses also have to balance among themselves.
So
the principal stresses also sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 have to balance so that the invariant is maintained.
So what is the problem?
So the problem is, sir, if the values are maximum, sir, in the invariant, I am having a doubt, sir, if the invariant is changing.
So, say that again.
Sir, if the values are maximum, sir, the stress values, so like sigma 1, 1, sigma 2 to sigma 3, 3, they attain their maximum value in the principal coordinate system.
Yeah.
So if that is the case, then the sigma 1, 1 plus sigma 2, 2 plus sigma 3, 3, which is the first invariant, that will also increase. In that sense, I am having the doubt, sir.
So you can think of it like this, that not think of it. You try to give me an illustrative example of what is actually bothering you. So let's say you have a certain system where you are getting as the maximum values of the principal stresses, like let's say 12 megapascal, 10 megapascal, 8 megapascal, or something like that. Okay.
Yes, sir.
It could be negative values also, no problem. Take whatever is convenient for you and give me a counter example to what you would think is happening. Okay, then I can actually understand what you mean.
Okay,
probably you are meaning something like in another coordinate system, one of the values will be higher than one of the principal stress values. Then does it mean that it is getting violated? The principal stress value is getting violated. Maybe something like that.
No, sir. Sir, suppose in a coordinate system, sir, it is not a principal coordinate system, but the values of sigma 1, 1, sigma 2 to sigma 3, 3 have some values, sir. Like like 5, 6, 7 like that.
Yes. Yes.
But when I switch to principal coordinate system, the
Yeah.
values of all the three components sigma 1, sigma 2 to sigma 3 will increase to maximum.
No. How will then the invariant nature will go away?
Yes, sir. That's what I'm asking, sir. That is a doubt, sir.
So right. So so it is like this. So try to think of it that what I was telling Kostov, that the actual definition from which we are getting that eigenvalue problem is the requirement that on that plane the shear stress values are going to be 0. In fact, that is what we have used to determine to arrive at that eigenvalue problem, right?
Yes.
We have not really maximized those things. See, if you look back at the derivation of the principal stresses that I have discussed in the thing, so I actually talk about we wish to find out those planes on which the shear stresses are 0, and that is the motivating discussion which leads to the discussion of the principal stresses. So
Yes,
when you are talking about the maximum values, the sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3, those are the values that are appearing on those planes where the shear stresses happen to be 0.
yes,
It is possible that if you go to another coordinate system, then one of the individual values may be greater than one of the principal stresses that you are obtaining elsewhere.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that is very much possible. In fact, that is going to happen. Otherwise, that invariant nature is not going to hold true.
Yes, sir. Sir,
But in that plane, the only issue is that if you manage to find such a plane on which the normal stress value exceeds the value of the one of the principal stress values, then you can be sure that on that plane the maximum the shear stress value is not 0.
Yes, sir.
And correspondingly, the two directions which are perpendicular to it, okay, you cannot find situations like this, where the normal stress values are maximum. That's why I'm saying, so you try to find out an example like this, where you are getting higher value of the normal stress as compared to to maybe any one of the principal stress values, and then you try to find out the corresponding shear stress. You can try to do this little exercise in the two-dimensional case. No need to do in the three-dimensional case. Do it in two-dimensional case. It will be easier and cleaner.
Yes, sir. Sir, in case of strain, the same thing will apply.
So in case of strain, you go and see how we have done it. And again, in that case also, you try to find out a counter example.
Sir, in strain we have maximized, sir.
We have actually no. Actually, we have not maximized it. We have not maximized it. We have extremized it. If we had maximized it, we would have had to take the second derivative also and taken that to be less than 0. Because you remember from differential calculus that for maximum value, you not only set the first derivative equal to 0, that only gives you the extremum values. For the maximum values, you need to set the second derivative to be less than 0. So something equivalent to that we would have to do in the multivariable case that we were concerned with in the strain chapter. So you've only extremized it.
Yes, sir. Yes,
right?
Sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And see, you're a PhD student, right? So I can actually tell you. So you know the Mohr circle, right? So you think the three-dimensional Mohr circle, right? Are you familiar with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3, right?
Yes, sir.
Now let's arrange the sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 by their numerical values. So let's say sigma 1 is the highest, sigma 2 is the middle one, and sigma 3 is the lowest one. So sigma 3 is what I'm now saying is that sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma 3 are the principal values, they are the extremum values. And in fact, if you look at the diagram, from all the admissible stress states of stress that are depicted by that Mohr circle, the sigma 3 is the normal stress having the least possible value. Is it not? Anywhere
Yes.
else on the diagram you said, the normal stress value is larger than that. Is it not?
So yes, sir, exactly, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So sigma 3 is actually one of the extremum values. In fact, it is, if you to say strictly, it is the minimum value.
Yes, sir.
Yes. But among those three principal stresses, one of them is the highest. That highest is the sigma 1.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So Akshay, Bajirao, Shinde, do you want to ask something? You have unmuted yourself. Akshay, Bajirao, Shinde.
Oh, no, sir. No, sir.
Okay, please mute yourself then. Next, Dipanshu is asking something. So since it is already 6 o'clock, people who want to leave can leave. This recorded live session will be available. The recording will be available to everyone. So Dipanshu is asking, value of ES hat is equal to N. What is this? Traction vector crossed with n hat and then again crossed with n hat. Yes, that gives us the correct direction. Yeah. And then you have to take divided by its magnitude to get the unit vector. Yeah, that's right. So we wish to find out the ES hat in the same plane that is contained by the T vector and the N vector. So first we take the cross product of that, and then we take the cross product of that with the N hat. So it gives us a unit vector in the plane that is contained that contains T and N. So if there are no more questions, probably we can end this live session. So Ganesh, maybe you can stop the recording.